September 1st, 1943. At the humid operations tent of Rabaul Airfield, New Britain, the legendary Lieutenant Commander Saburowski paused. His remaining good eye, the other scar by American gunfire a year prior, scanned the latest intelligence report, the text eliciting a dismissive, almost scornful laugh. The Americans, the report stated, had fielded a new fighter, the F-6F Hellcat. It was described as heavy as a bomber, wide as a transport aircraft, and estimated to weigh nearly twice the nimble A-6M0. To the veteran naval aviators, this seemed definitive proof of another fundamental American failure in aeronautical design. Through the tent flaps, Sakai could observe squadrons of A-6M0s lined up on the pierced steel planking, sleek, elegant, and lethally successful. For 2 unbroken years, these aircraft had enforced Japanese dominance across the Pacific theater. British Hurricanes, American P-40S, and Dutch Brewster Buffaloes had all fallen before the Zero's concentrated firepower. This latest American attempt, the seemingly bloated Hellcat, was judged to be no different. Yet, the profound historical irony was lost entirely on the Japanese naval aviators gathering for their morning briefing. They were unaware that in precisely 30 days, this purported design failure would initiate the systematic annihilation of Japanese naval aviation. The mathematics of aerial supremacy were poised for a radical revision. The F-6F Hellcat would ultimately achieve a devastating combat kill ratio of 19-1, destroying 5,223 enemy aircraft while suffering the loss of only 270 in aerial combat. It would fundamentally transform the nature of carrier warfare, decisively breaking the backbone of Japanese air power and proving that the Zero's reign of terror had been built on a foundation of fatal assumptions. Within 6 months, the very pilots now laughing at intelligence reports would be composing their final letters home, realizing that encountering a formation of Hellcats meant facing the statistical certainty of death. This heavy, seemingly wrong aircraft marked the irreversible end of the rising sun zenith. The audacious confidence displayed by the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service in September 1943 was not born of mere arrogance, but of cold, relentless mathematics. Since the devastating strike on December 7, 1941, Japan's air arm had compiled victory ratios that seemed to defy the very laws of aerial combat. The statistics were staggering. At Pearl Harbor, they sacrificed just 29 aircraft while obliterating 347 Allied planes. The pattern continued over the Philippines, where 7 losses were traded for 103 destroyed, and the raid over Darwin resulted in 2 losses against 30 enemy aircraft downed. The air wings of the British Far East Fleet had been utterly annihilated, and the Dutch East Indies Air Force was eliminated in a matter of days. At the core of this unprecedented air dominance flew the Mitsubishi A-6M0 Sun, an aircraft that had fundamentally rewritten the doctrine of fighter design. When capture examples finally reached American engineers for testing in 1942, the performance figures were so radical that they were initially dismissed as impossible. Here was a single-seat fighter possessing the operational range of a bomber, the agility and maneuverability typically reserved for a biplane, and the requisite firepower to dispatch anything it successfully intercepted. This aerial supremacy was perhaps best articulated by Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would eventually emerge as Japan's ace of aces with 87 confirmed kills. In his recovered diary, Nishizawa described the experience. "Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought, not just control input." He noted the stark contrast with their adversaries. American planes fly like trucks, powerful but clumsy. They build fighters like they build cars. Heavy, overbuilt, wasteful. The Zero achieved its miraculous performance through a revolutionary design philosophy rooted in extreme weight saving. Utilizing extra superduralumin, a classified aluminum alloy, the airframe was rendered nearly 30% lighter than comparable American designs. This performance came at a terrible cost. There was no armor plate to protect the pilot, no self-sealing fuel tanks to add critical weight, and even the aircraft radio was frequently removed to save a mere 30 pounds. Every single ounce was ruthlessly sacrificed on the altar of speed and agility. This period of unquestioned superiority led directly to a dangerous intelligence dismissal. The first detailed reports concerning the specifications of the Grumman F-6F Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence through neutral Swedish sources in early 1943. The specifications seemed like the Hellcat was engineered not for grace, but for brute force and survivability. Weighing 12,186 pounds fully loaded, more than double the 5,800-pound Mitsubishi Zero, the American fighter featured a draggy radial engine and a robust airframe carrying extensive features the Japanese deemed superfluous. It was a fortress equipped with 2,400 rounds of ammunition, comprehensive armor plate, bulletproof glass, and self-sealing fuel tanks holding 250 gallons. When Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who orchestrated the attack on Pearl Harbor, reviewed these specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters, his analysis, preserved in the Japanese Defense Archives, was profoundly dismissive. Genda asserted that the Americans had learned nothing from earlier conflicts, attempting to overcome pilot skill with the sheer weight of machinery, concluding, "A Zero will fly circles around it." The mathematics of the era seemed to support this arrogance. The Zero's light wing loading of 22 pounds per square foot afforded it an impossibly tight turning radius of 612 feet. Conversely, the Hellcat's heavy loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot suggested a turning radius exceeding 900 feet. In the turning dogfight, the very basis of established Japanese fighter tactics, the Hellcat appeared fatally handicapped. This theoretical certainty was first challenged on September 30th, 1943, near Marcus Island. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission when he spotted them, 6 dark blue shapes climbing aggressively from the southeast. His initial thought, recorded in his after-action report, was that they would be 25 bombers on an unusual heading. Yet, as the aircraft turned, he recognized a distinctive silhouette, a single-engine fighter with a massive fuselage and wings that seemed disproportionately short for the body. This, he would write, was his first encounter with the F-6F type fighter, noting his initial impression that the Americans had mounted fighter guns onto the airframe of a torpedo bomber. Fukui immediately engaged, relying on standard tactics, using the Zero's superior turn rate to gain a decisive position on the enemy's tail. Fukui initiated his standard high-speed diving turn, anticipating that the heavy American fighter would continue its straight trajectory, allowing the nimble Zero to curve into the vulnerable 6 o'clock position. Instead, the Hellcat performed a maneuver that defied all known Japanese tactical expectations. It did not run, nor did it attempt to match the Zero's turn radius. It went vertical. The sheer might of the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, a formidable 2,000 horsepower, a crushing 700 horsepower advantage over the Zero's Nakajima Sake 1,130 horsepower, drove the F-6F Hellcat upward at staggering 3,500 feet per minute. Attempting to follow this impossible ascent, Fukui watched helplessly as his airspeed rapidly decayed, the lightweight Zero struggling desperately against the pull of gravity. As they crested 15,000 feet, the Hellcat executed a maneuver previously considered impossible for a fighter with bulk, a devastating hammerhead turn that inverted its position, dropping it precisely onto Fukui's tail assembly. The American opened fire immediately from 400 meters. Fukui later reported the shocking realization: 6 machine guns, not the we expected. The resulting volume of fire was unprecedented. His aircraft absorbed 17 hits in a mere 3 seconds. Only by plunging into a violent, uncontrolled spin did Fukui manage to escape, barely nursing his bullet-riddled Zero back to Marcus Island. His wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Maso, did not return, nor did the reconnaissance aircraft they were tasked with protecting. It was first blood to the Hellcat, a chilling demonstration of the weight paradox. This new reality was violently confirmed on October 5, 1943, when Task Force 14 struck Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what appeared to be merely another nuisance raid. American carriers had launched these hit-and-run attacks for months, habitually fleeing before the Japanese fighters could fully engage. But this time, the rules of engagement had changed. "We climbed to 20,000 feet, Shiga recorded in his personal diary. Below us, 12 F-6F fighters in 3 divisions. We held every advantage: altitude, position, surprise. Victory was certain, The ensuing engagement, however, utterly shattered entrenched Japanese tactical doctrine. As the Zeros initiated their attack dive upon the Hellcats, the American fighters refused to scatter or attempt to. The American pilots maintained a disciplined formation, accelerating in a gentle dive that kept their energy state high. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, hoping for fortunate strikes, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment. The Hellcat was engineered for survivability. Its layered armor included 212 pounds of plate protecting the pilot, 110 pounds dedicated to shielding the critical oil system, and robust self-sealing tanks capable of withstanding dozens of hits. As the nimble Zeros exhausted their ammunition in frustrated diving passes, the Hellcats executed their crushing counterattack. They deliberately eschewed the traditional turning dogfight, instead utilizing their substantial weight and engine power as a weapon. Climbing at full throttle, they sought the high altitudes where the Zero's engine struggled desperately for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing a formidable 1,650 horsepower, while the Zero's output had plummeted to a mere 900. The result was catastrophic. As the Japanese pilot Shiga later wrote, "They came down on us like hawks on sparrows. Their weight gave them speed we couldn't match. They would dive, fire those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before we could react. 8 Zeros were shot down in the engagement. No Hellcats were lost, a chilling prophecy of the Marianas Turkey shoot yet to come." This stark reality was acknowledged on November 11, 1943, at Rabaul. The assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened intently as Lieutenant Commander Tao Tanamizu briefed them on the new American tactics. Tanamizu, a veteran with 32 confirmed victories, was one of the few who had survived multiple encounters with the F-6F. "Forget everything you know about air combat," he warned. "The Americans have changed the rules. They no longer fight our fight. They fight like executioners, not warriors." Tanamizu explained the fatal lesson Japanese pilots were slowly internalizing. The Hellcat was not designed to outturn the Zero, but rather designed to ensure it would never need to. Utilizing a disciplined combat doctrine known as energy fighting, Hellcat pilots rigorously maintained speed and altitude, converting potential energy into kinetic force for sudden, slashing attacks that offered the Zero pilots no chance of escape. The strategic shift was stark. As pilot Tanamizu observed, the enemy had abandoned individual duels for systematic, radio-guided teamwork, exploiting their superior maneuverability in coordinated pairs, one high, one low. "While you engage one," he lamented, "the other is already diving on you." The Americans' radios, initially mocked by the Japanese for adding unnecessary weight, allowed them to coordinate perfectly. "We fly as individual samurai," Tanamizu concluded. "They fight as a machine." By December 1943, at Truck Lagoon, this technological gulf was undeniable. Commander Mitsuo Fukuda, the officer who had famously led the Pearl Harbor attack and now served as Air Operations Officer for Combined Fleet, inspected the wrecked Zeros returning from encounters with the Hellcats. The disparity in firepower was not just noticeable, it was mathematically crushing. A Hellcat 6 Browning M2 machine guns unleashed a total of 4,500 rounds per minute. Each .50 caliber bullet weighed 46 grams, traveled at 2,900 feet per second, and delivered 3,500 foot-pounds of energy. In contrast, the Zero's two 7.7mm machine guns fired projectiles weighing only 11 grams at 2,300 feet per second, yielding a mere 750 foot-pounds of energy. Yet, more terrifying than the firepower gap were the American advances in fighter direction. While Japanese pilots strained their eyesight to spot the enemy, Hellcat pilots were guided precisely to their targets by shipboard radar controllers capable of tracking Japanese aircraft from 50 miles away. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi described his first radar-directed interception with chilling clarity. "We were climbing through clouds when they hit us. No warning, no visual contact. Hellcats dove from above, perfectly positioned and exactly on their heading. They knew where we were, our altitude, our course. We were blind men fighting those who could see in the dark." This lethal pilot equation, superior technology married to coordinated strategy, was compounded by a catastrophic human resource crisis. By January 1944, The Imperial Navy's pilot training program, once the world's most demanding, requiring 3 years and 700 flight hours before a pilot saw combat, was collapsing under the strain of attrition. Army pilots received. The initial Japanese naval aviator was an elite warrior, rigorously trained over a minimum of 500 hours, mastering complex aerobatics, precision gunnery, and even the philosophical tenets of aerial combat. By early 1944, this tradition was shattered. Due to crippling fuel shortages, new naval pilots were rushed into cockpits with only 300 hours of flight time, while Army pilots received a mere 200. Most preliminary instruction relied on fuel-saving gliders. Gunnery practice was dangerously curtailed, limited to a mere 50 rounds per pilot. Essential skills like formation flying, instrument flight, and fundamental radio procedures were systematically eliminated in a desperate push to reinforce the front lines. In stark contrast, American aviators arrived with a minimum of 300 hours, including 50 hours specifically in their combat type, having expended thousands of practice rounds and drilled carrier landings until the motions became automatic, honing complex energy tactics safely over Texas airfields. The tragic result was recognized by those forced to execute the policy. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, a training officer at Kasumagura Naval Air Station, articulated the grim situation in his final report. "We are sending children to fight professionals." He documented the fate of one recruit. Yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto arrived at the front. He had never fired his guns in flight. "We have no ammunition for practice." He had never flown at night. "We have no fuel for such training." He lasted 7 minutes in his first combat. This catastrophic disparity found its inevitable climax during the period known as the Formosa Revelation, the Battle of Formosa, spanning October 12th to 16th, 1944. Vice Admiral Shagru Fukuoka, commander of the 2nd Air Fleet, desperately committed over 700 aircraft, including the last vestiges of trained pilots drawn from homeland training squadrons, to halt the sustained American carrier raids on Formosa. The Japanese High Command immediately claimed a spectacular victory. 26 carriers and battleships allegedly sunk, with 300 aircraft destroyed. The terrifying reality, however, emerged only after the returning pilots were debriefed and the gun camera footage developed. The actual American losses amounted to 89 aircraft. Japan's price was catastrophic. 329 aircraft destroyed, along with the virtual annihilation of almost every remaining experienced pilot. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the few survivors. The visceral accounts of the few surviving veterans describe the aerial slaughter in chilling detail. As one veteran noted in his memoirs, the F-6F Hellcats were waiting at every altitude. As we climbed, they were above us. As we dove, they were below. They had divided the sky into grids, each section covered by a division. It was not combat. It was systematic extermination. This infamous day, June 19, 1944, would forever be remembered as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The setting was a vast expanse of the Philippine Sea, where the Imperial Japanese Navy committed its last fully reconstituted carrier force to Operation Ago, the decisive battle intended to destroy American carrier power in the Pacific. Admiral Jaburo Ozawa commanded 9 carriers and approximately 450 aircraft, crewed by their best remaining pilots. Arrayed against them was the overwhelming might of Task Force 58, deploying 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, for 150 of which were the formidable F-6F Hellcats. Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 successive waves, confident that the acclaimed range of zero and the inherent skill of his air crews would prevail. The first critical wave of 69 aircraft lifted off at 0830. Immediately, American radar detected the incoming formations at a staggering 150 miles. Hellcats were vectored for interception with perfect strategic positioning, holding the crucial altitude advantage, the sun at their backs, and approaching from the Japanese blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Arb, leading the fighter escort, registered the horrifying scale of the opposition just minutes before engagement. He witnessed the enemy stacked high. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them, waiting like a steel curtain. We were at 18,000 feet. Every advantage was theirs. The engagement that followed lasted a mere 12 minutes. Of the 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were shot down. American pilots achieved legendary status that day, none more so than Commander David McCampbell, CAG of Air Group 15, who personally accounted for 7 enemy aircraft. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, claimed 6. McCampbell reported the tactical mismatch plainly. The Zeros tried to turn with us. We simply refused. We'd make a high side run, shoot one down, zoom climb back to altitude. They'd try to follow, stall out, and another Hellcat would pick them off. By the close of the day, the Japanese had suffered catastrophic, irrecoverable losses, totaling 346 carrier aircraft destroyed, supplemented by 50 land-based planes. The aerial slaughter over the Philippine Sea, which cost the Americans just 30 aircraft from all causes, and was infamously dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by pilots witnessing the enemy's helplessness, foreshadowed the complete reversal of air superiority. This dominance was brutally confirmed during the Battle of Leyte Gulf on October 24th, 1944. Here, Commander David McCampbell would set his single-mission record for the war. Leading a mere 7 F-6F Hellcats launched from the USS Essex, McCampbell intercepted a massive force of 60 Japanese aircraft intent on striking the American fleet. Over the course of a staggering 90-minute engagement, McCampbell personally downed 9 enemy aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers, while his wingman, Roy Rushing, contributed another 6 kills. This engagement demonstrated the definitive shift in air power. 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without loss. McCampbell later recorded the intense lopsidedness. I ran out of ammunition after the 9th kill. The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout. Not a single hit on my aircraft despite being outnumbered 8-1. These 2 legendary ace-in-the-day performances, 7 kills on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, secured McCampbell the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross, symbolizing American ascendance. Conversely, the relentless destruction wrought by the Hellcats across both the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf produced a profound psychological collapse among surviving Japanese aviators, which military psychologists later termed Hellcat psychosis. Admiral Ozawa, in his chilling after-action report, captured the systemic failure. The enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved something we thought impossible, the industrialization of air combat. Each Hellcat was not an individual fighter, but a component in a vast machine. Ozawa lamented that Japanese pilots, no matter their skill, were engaging not planes, but an overwhelming system. This systemic failure was exacerbated by a critical pilot shortage. By early 1945, basic training for Navy pilots was disastrously reduced to merely 40 to 50 hours, and 60 to 70 hours for Army pilots, with Kamikaze recruits receiving only 40 to 50 hours. The Okinawa campaign, codenamed Operation Iceberg, unfolded between April and June 1945, requiring a brutal 7 days of preliminary training before the main assault. This was the final, desperate phase of the Pacific War, characterized by the Japanese launching approximately 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the colossal American fleet. In this apocalyptic environment, the Hellcat fighter evolved from an offensive weapon into the critical defender against the desperation of suicide attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his famed Flying Circus division of Hellcats, became instrumental, personally shooting down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign. Valencia's success stemmed from tactical innovations that rendered traditional Japanese maneuvers suicidal. He developed the mowing machine, a coordinated attack utilizing 4 Hellcats flying in line abreast, separated by 100 yards, which would sweep through enemy formations at high speed. As Valencia explained, each pilot covered a sector. We make one pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. The mathematics of the Okinawa air battles were stark. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming 2,351 victories against only 249 losses, establishing a devastating 9.5 to 1 ratio. More significantly, these interceptors prevented approximately 80% of the kamikaze aircraft from ever reaching their targets. By 1945, the technological chasm separating combatants had become unbridgeable. The F6F5 Hellcat incorporated critical improvements that made it even deadlier, including water injection boosting power to 2,200 horsepower, zero-length rocket launchers, improved armor plating, and the revolutionary K-14 computing gun sight, which calculated deflection automatically. Japan's legendary ace, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, officially credited with 28 victories, though modern historians estimate closer to 15, encountered the Hellcat for the first time in June 1944. Despite his unparalleled skill and experience, he was nearly killed in that initial engagement. In his autobiography, Sakai lamented that it performed my best aerobatics, loops, rolls. The Hellcat was so dominant that survival often hinged not on skill, but on enemy error. One Japanese pilot recalled executing every maneuver perfected over 200 combats, yet the F6F tracked effortlessly, the chase ending only because the American failed to release his external drop tank. This personal terror translated directly into devastating strategic arithmetic. By the war's conclusion, the F6F Hellcat had annihilated 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, achieving a staggering 19.3 to 1 kill ratio. It produced 305 U.S. Navy aces and accounted for 3/4 of all Navy air-to-air victories. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, the cost was catastrophic. Of the 18,000 elite naval aviators who began the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945. This decimation forced a radical transformation. The shift from an elite fighting force to formalized kamikaze operations was the ultimate, grim admission of the Hellcat's operational superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan institutionalized self-sacrifice. Vice Admiral Takejiro Nishi, the architect of the program, justified the equation with stark mathematics. A conventional zero attack against a carrier had near-zero success due to Hellcat interception, but transformed into a guided missile, the probability of a decisive hit increased to 30%. The pilot, Onishi reasoned, died regardless. As a kamikaze, his death gained meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Japan's greatest living ace, escorted the first official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seiki, claiming his 86th and 87 victories, 2 F6F Hellcats, in the process. Yet, the supremacy of the aircraft he briefly bested proved inescapable. The very next day, October 26, 1944, Nishizawa died, utterly helpless as a passenger aboard a transport plane, shot down by Hellcats from VF-14. His fate offered a final bitter testimony to the dominance of the F6F, a dominance sealed with Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast on August 15, 1945. At Atsugi Airfield, Captain Minoru Genda, a man who had famously dismissed the American F-6F Hellcat as an aircraft prioritizing mere weight over finesse, listened stoically to the Emperor's surrender broadcast. Gathered around him were the shattered remnants of Japanese naval aviation. Teenage pilots with often fewer than 40 hours of flight time, their aircraft cobbled together from inadequate spare parts, their fuel tanks perpetually empty. Yet, even as the Emperor spoke, the war had not yet fully ceased. That same afternoon, shortly after 2 p.m., Enon Clarence Moore VF-31, flying from the carrier USS Bellewood, secured the last aerial victory of World War II, intercepting a Yokosuka D-4 wide Judy dive bomber near the American fleet, whose pilot was apparently unaware of the formal capitulation. Moore's 2 short bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns decisively concluded the Pacific Air War. The full revelation of American industrial and engineering superiority came during the occupation. In September 1945, at Atsugi Airfield, the first American aircraft to land after the surrender were 12 F-6F Hellcats from the USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots, mechanics, and ground crew lined perimeter, eager to view their ultimate tormentor up close. American ace Lieutenant Robert Vasu, boasting 19 victories, performed a casual demonstration of the Hellcat's operational envelope. His effortless aerobatics, the loops, rolls, and high G climbs that would have instantly torn apart the fragile frame of a Zero, left the Japanese observers speechless. You have to understand, Vad to explain to an interpreter, this isn't even pushing it. In combat with water injection, it's 20% more powerful. The plane is stressed for 13 GS. I've never managed to break one. The subsequent engineering post-mortem confirmed the disparity. Japanese engineers studying captured Hellcats discovered the true extent of American industrial might. The heart of the machine, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine, contained 2,840 precision machine parts, each component perfectly interchangeable with any other R-2800 engine worldwide. In stark contrast, the Nakajima Sakai engine required meticulous hand-fitting of components. Consequently, no two engines were ever exactly alike. The strategic disparity was perhaps best summarized by Jiro Horikoshi, the chief designer of the famed Zero fighter, who studied the American F-6F Hellcat extensively after the cessation of hostilities. His post-war conclusion was devastatingly simple. We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While Japan was perfecting the singular weapon, the metaphorical sword, the United States was constructing an overwhelming industrial age. The sheer scale of this production miracle, centered on Grumman, transformed the Hellcat itself into a weapon of attrition. The Bethpage, New York, factory became a relentless engine of war, operating around clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At the zenith of this output, a newly assembled Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. In just 30 months, Grumman delivered 12,275 Hellcats, a feat of logistics and manufacturing the Japanese industrial base simply could not comprehend. The quantitative gap was staggering. In 1944, Japan managed to produce 5,100 fighters of all types, while America assembled a staggering 35,000 fighters that same year alone. This massive throughput relied on production system innovations that defied Axis expectations, including the use of color-coded instructions for rapid, complex component assembly, maintaining high-quality standards despite operating shifts around the clock. This relentless output fueled a profound strategic revolution in naval warfare. Pre-war doctrine viewed aircraft carriers as inherently vulnerable platforms, forced to strike first to ensure survival. The F-6F Hellcat inverted this calculus. Carriers were transformed into mobile fortresses, capable of absorbing and systematically repelling any concerted air attack. Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of the mighty Task Force 58, grasped the magnitude of this transformation completely. His newfound confidence was stark. With the Hellcat, we don't need to find them first. Let them come. The F-6F will destroy them at our convenience. This aggressive posture allowed for unprecedented offensive operations, enabling American carrier groups to remain parked off enemy coastlines for weeks on end, their protective Hellcat umbrellas rendering them virtually invulnerable to airborne threats, a true cultural and technological collision. The operational conflict between the Hellcat and Japanese aviation was rooted not merely in technology, but in a profound cultural philosophy that invalidated Japanese military doctrine. The samurai tradition emphasized individual excellence, spiritual strength, and the acceptance of death. Conversely, the Hellcat embodied systematic efficiency, material superiority, and the preservation of life. This philosophical gulf meant Japanese pilots could not adapt to Hellcat tactics, even when they fully understood them. The concept of refusing combat when tactically disadvantaged, fundamental to American doctrine, was literally unthinkable to pilots trained in the strictures of Bushido. The judgment of history was rendered clearly in 1962, when the United States Navy held a symposium on Pacific War aviation, gathering American and Japanese veterans to discuss the conflict with historical perspective. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's ace of aces with 34 victories, stated simply, the Hellcat won the Pacific Air War. Period. It destroyed Japanese aviation and made our victory inevitable. Commander Saburo Sakai, a legendary Zero pilot, responded with a poignant concession. The Zero was a superior fighter. The Hellcat was a superior weapon system. We never understood the difference until too late. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost. The ultimate reckoning of this disparity is revealed through simple mathematics that tell a profound story. The overall kill ratio stood at an astonishing 19-1 and 13-1 specifically against Zeros. American manufacturers produced 12,275 Hellcats in only 30 months, dwarfing the approximately 6,000 Zeros manufactured between 1943 and 1945. Furthermore, American pilots trained on Hellcats numbered well over 5,000, while fewer than 100 combat-capable Japanese pilots remained by August 1945. Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa, who had commanded the Japanese fleet at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, provided perhaps the most honest assessment of this material reality. We laughed at the Hellcat because initially, Japanese aviators registered only contempt for the F-6F Hellcat. They mocked its robust fuselage and formidable weight, failing to grasp that this very heft was emblematic of an industrial democracy's commitment to protecting its pilots, a philosophy the Japanese military fundamentally rejected. This laughter ceased abruptly when the implications of the Hellcat's design became clear. By then, the Imperial Air Forces had effectively been annihilated. The final, crushing assessment of this dominance came from Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, a legendary Zero Ace who survived the conflict and lived until 2000. In his final interviews, Sakai articulated the totality of the reversal, stating that while the nimble Zero had briefly elevated Japan to a great naval power, the Hellcat brutally stripped away that illusion. The Zero made Japan a great naval power, he reflected. The Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed. We thought we were samurai, but the Hellcat showed us we were just men with outdated weapons facing the future. This realization led to the ultimate defeat, existing purely at the enemy's discretion, knowing that every surviving Japanese pilot owed his life to the choice of a Hellcat pilot to let him live. The F-6F Hellcat entered service weighing nearly twice the A-6M0, boasting integrated armor and advanced self-sealing fuel tanks, defensive measures absent from its Japanese counterpart. It was propelled by the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine, a technological marvel that the beleaguered Japanese industry could neither replicate nor match in reliability. Furthermore, the Hellcat was guided by sophisticated radar systems the enemy could not detect, flown by pilots who received rigorous, continuous training, and, critically, produced on an unprecedented scale that defied Japanese comprehension. The Hellcat's victory transcended aerial combat. It was a decisive triumph of systemic, industrial strength over a doctrine rooted in individual prowess and self-sacrifice. It proved that the nation capable of building the better system would inevitably crush the nation that could only foster better individual warriors. The Hellcat, after absorbing the initial mockery, invariably delivered the final, conclusive judgment.